All right, it's 5. I think we should get started. All right, it's time. Welcome to Tigress at IETF117. Hope everyone is having a good week so far. And I'm sure most of you are almost ready to go back home as well. I know I'm going tonight. So just to reiterate, if you just joined, please make sure you use the QR code to sign in or the on-site tool. Myself, Prachi Jain, Chair Tigress, with me, Leaf, Co-Chair. To begin with, please note the note well. There are several BCPs listed, Code of Conduct. IETF takes it very seriously. We should all take it very seriously. Please respect your peers. If you don't agree with anything, be polite and nice enough to say it nicely. And just make sure you're following it, being respectful to others, and following all the guidelines that IETF says. Next slide, please. All right, meeting tips. As I said earlier, use the QR code on-site tool to check in. If you are in person, please make sure you enter the mic queue to ask any questions for remote participants as well. Keep your audio and video off unless you are talking. And then we recommend using a headset to make sure you are audible clearly. These are some of the resources. If you need the agenda, the meeting material, everything is up there. And then let's come to agenda. So to begin with, we will be talking about the two adopted documents. One is the requirements doc, the other one is the threat model. We did an adoption call, I think, a couple of months ago, and reached consensus, adopted those working group docs. So they are now Tigress docs, and we'll continue working on them, iterating on them, refining them, and then ultimately move to the next steps. And then, come on, Roman. And then we'll move on to discussions with authors. With that, we do need a minute taker. Is there anybody who would like to help? Please go to the notepad tool. I know Leaf will be taking some notes. If there is anybody else who can please help fill in the details, it would be very helpful. Oh, thank you so much. It's already. Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. With that, I think we are ready for the authors to come and begin. To begin with, we have Brad. And we'll go ahead and share Brad's presentation. Yes.
The one, yeah, the one that was described last. Do you want to request control? Oh. Is that the document? There you go. All right. Hi, y'all. Brad Lassie. I'm going to talk about the requirements and the threat model doc. Look at that. Since 116, we had both docs adopted by the working group. There are currently no open issues on these docs. I do want to especially thank both Ecker and DKG for their review over the last few months. That said, the fact that there are no open issues, I am not confident that there are no issues in the docs. So really a plea and a request, please read through these and give feedback either on list or via issues or PRs. Be much appreciated. With that being covered, I do want to ask, now that we have these two documents, does the working group feel we understand the space well enough? Are there any questions about the goals or what's needed for this work?
Has everybody read the requirements draft and the threat model? Okay, so would it make sense that, I mean, we give everybody some, no, I mean, bring it back to the mailing list? Do we have volunteers who would like to read and share their feedback? Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right.
And I guess even if you haven't read the drafts, any questions about the things we're trying to do here that are left over from previous iterations of this working group meeting, just wanted to leave that open. Eric?
Eric Henry Apple. So I actually read through both of these rather recently. I did have a couple of questions around, there's a bunch of requirements saying that, hey, we need to be able to do multiple round trips. We might want to have multiple conversations. And then there's another set of requirements around kind of, when I'm done talking to you, this all goes away and you can't correlate and all that kind of thing. And it seemed like, are those coming from the same conceptual model of what's going on, or do we have a place where those conflict?
Do you have something in mind how they would conflict, or?
It seems as though there's a requirement that the sender and the receiver don't need to be there at the same time. But we also want to not necessarily be able to tie them together or do anything else.
I think it's, or the intention there is we don't want to be able to correlate a sender or a receiver across various sends and receives. So as an example, if I were to send you a key and you received it, and then you were to say send Dimitri a key, it is anticipated that the relay server would have a notion of sender one and receiver one, and a separate notion of sender two and receiver two for each of those, where one and two there,
and not know that they're the same.
But not know that that's receiver one and sender two are the same person. That's the intention there.
Lovely, thank you.
Was that not clear in the draft, or?
I'll file issues for any like editorial-y stuff. It's all good.
Appreciate it. All right. If not, so I think the next steps, besides hopefully getting a little more feedback on those two drafts, is to start to explore the various design directions that have been suggested, to understand how fruitful each of those directions are. Things that we know of right now are the original proposal that was presented in Philly. There's the ID on a web DAV-based solution that could be fleshed out a bit more, see how viable that is. And then as of last couple of days, I guess JMAP has been suggested as a potential structure to build upon. So again, if anyone has other design directions they'd like to suggest, that would be interesting, and you can either take it on the list or live here. Cool. And with that, Yogesh and Dimitri would like to, I guess, advocate for the original proposal over some of the other directions.
We can navigate the slides for you with that. Yep, that's fine. Yep, go ahead.
Just tell me what to say. Okay, sure. Thank you, Brad, for leading on. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming for this meeting. Dimitri and I are going to talk about solutions. And this is going to be an interactive session. So if you have any questions about the presentation or the requirements or anything, feel free to ask. It is not a one-way session. So as Brad mentioned, that there are at least a couple of viable candidates for a solution. One is the HTTP extension straight up done to achieve Tigress. That was presented in Philly, and at the time there was a lot of confusion about what is the problem space, what are we trying to solve. So if you read those meeting minutes from Philly, you'll realize that there is a lot of questions about what the requirements should be. And now I think we have tried to answer that. So it might be a good time to revisit that solution so it gets a fair shot. And the second solution, or rather second approach that was suggested to us in this working group was using WebDAO. So when we heard WebDAO, or rather when we talked to people about WebDAO, the reactions were curious and interesting. It was like, what is WebDAO? Or is it still alive? I mean, isn't JMap replacing it? Really, is WebDAO the right solution for this? But we don't want to dismiss WebDAO just because of those reactions. We want to give it a fair shot. So we did that. The idea is that what if we take a off-the-shelf WebDAO server and try to build Tigress with it? How would that look like? So next slide, please. So we tried to put off-the-shelf WebDAO solution against our requirements, and how does it go? As you can see, it meets about 7 out of 10 requirements with minor tweaks. So a solution with WebDAV is possibly achievable, but there are some things that need a deeper dive. And I want to bring that up to this room here so that we can use this collective brain power to perhaps come up with some solutions that can actually work. So if you have any questions, do feel free to interrupt and ask. Next slide, please. And oh yeah, there are also considerations that are in that requirements document, and there are a couple of considerations where it was not very clear how WebDAV would meet those. So we need a deep dive there as well, but I will let Dimitri talk about them when he comes to his part of the slides. Next one, please. So one of the requirements that I found hard to wrap my head around with WebDAV solution was the round trips requirement. And I think Eric also asked the question about it. So does anyone have questions about what this round trip requirement is, or how it relates to the credential transfer at all? Okay, sure, I'll summarize it. So I guess the idea is that, say, Alice wants to transfer her credential to Bob, and the type of credential, the protocol requires round trips. So Alice will send message 1 to Bob, Bob sends message to M2 to back to Alice, Alice sends a message M3 back to Bob, and then Bob has enough information to get the credential. That is the round trip requirement. So when trying to solve this problem with WebDAO, there is a question: how is this turn taking going to work? Like, does Alice create a WebDAO resource somewhere, and does Bob modify that same resource to send that M2 back? Or does Bob create a new resource? And if Bob creates a new resource, how does Alice know about that resource? Because to quote WebDAV RFC, any resource, WebDAV resource that's out there is readable to all the participants on the internet. So can we really make it writable so Bob can write into it? So I think that's a question for, I guess, the working group. If you have suggestions on how to solve this problem so that we can actually implement round trips, that would be really, really useful.
Eric Scorla. I mean, so I've thought about this problem for about 30 seconds. So, but I think I'd actually maybe like step back from this for a tiny bit, and Brad, feel free to jump in on me if you want. But like, you know, I have some thoughts about what's technically most suitable, but like my experience has been that what's most suitable is what the people in the working group want to do, and the enthusiasts want to do. And so like, if like everybody here is like, I want to do this new thing, and nobody's pushing, and nobody's actually gonna like stand up for like web-based solution, even though I think it might be better, like that is not a useful state of affairs. So I think the question I saw Casey or the draft, and maybe Casey like was just like being, you know, just it was experimental, or maybe like thinks it's good. But like if nobody's willing to like do his draft, then like forcing to use one of that path is not like helpful. So like I'm happy to talk about this technical detail, but I think maybe we're stepping back and asking what the sort of energy level situation is, which is that like there should be somebody who's actually in favor of some technology choice in order for the working group to think about adopting it. And like, while I don't, in fact, love the document you have, like, you know, it's better to do that, better to do that than something, than something else, than nothing, right? Am I not being clear? Maybe I'm not.
No, it was like a lot of. If you could summarize that.
Sure.
Would be
What
really
I'm saying is, we can talk about this technical question, but my question is: there anybody advocating for WebDAV that is actually going to do it? Is actually going to work on the draft?
That's a fantastic question.
I think the answer is no. Then like I think that's not like a realistic candidate, even though like I think it might be a better choice technically. and I'm not certainly not going to do it. So I know Brad had a little bit of thought about this, but I didn't know if how he felt about it. So maybe you're not enthusiastic either.
I think as I said earlier, that it's worth exploring. Because I think I think the original proposal recreates a bunch of functionality that it is worth seeing that exploration out a bit more. And then comparing the two.
Well, I'm very happy to exercise. I just don't want to be like, I don't want to drag people through a long extra parse exercise. So I think like I can imagine a number of ways to answer this question, including that the files are indexed by number. So you go odd even, or you rewrite. Obviously if it's odd even, you won't need to do locking. You're looking puzzled, but I think what you do is you say like that the messages from Alice to Bob are odd, and the messages from Bob to Alice are even. They have the same prefix, and they have like a numeric suffix. So this seems quite soluble if like one was trying to solve it. So I think and then you wouldn't need locking, obviously.
And what kind of locking would that?
You wouldn't need locking at all because because each side. What you need locking. You need locking in the sense that like that you need the reading rights to be atomic, but as long as you agree they're atomic, it'll work, right? So I think that's actually pretty straightforward. I think it's actually, I guess I would say whether you're using WebDAV or not, like the idiom that the more like this is a Dropbox that people are reading and writing from, like I guess taking a step back from like this particular WebDAV question, I think architecturally, the more your protocol looks like it's a Dropbox that people read and write from, and the more it has abstract Dropbox semantics, that's the happier we're going to be in terms of like extensions. So like, I think even if you were saying I don't want to use WebDAV, I still would want to have the resources be labeled that way, so it didn't act weird.
So are we going in the direction that WebDAV is not really? So I mean, it was a suggestion, so we do want to take it seriously. We don't want to dismiss it summarily. But are we leaning towards that WebDAV is not really the right, or it's not really required? Is that the direction that I heard, or maybe I misheard it?
Sure. Okay. Well, let me try to state my position again, which is I think that like any technology, should people enthusiastic about it, and so, but I also heard Brad say he thought it was worth like digging in this a little bit. So like I'm for the purpose of discussion of digging into it. But like but I'm certainly like open to like the chairs or like the working group saying, well, like no one wants to do that, and so like let's not do it, right? So I'm like trying to do both at once, right? But I'm also being answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of enthusiasm, like I'm not sure that I'd love for my door locks in my car to have like more WebDAV. And that goes exceedingly well. But at the same time, I think the idea of what is the shape of the thing that we're trying to build and how do we reason about it is really good to define. And then at that point, the question is, okay, is this a whole bunch of extensions to WebDAV to get something with that shape? And is building that extension on top of something else, JMap, HTTP, anything, a smaller delta or a more palatable delta that works better with what people need? Or if this is truly off-the-shelf WebDAV with X strategy for how to use it, that seems more exciting than WebDAV plus X, where X might be slightly smaller than the plus Y on top of something else that wasn't WebDAV. But I do strongly think that saying what is the conceptual thing that this is analogous to, as much as we don't have to build things that are based on real world concepts. I think people reason about and analyze and handle security implications of things that they can grasp much better. And so is this a Dropbox where I have a little slot where I stick something and then I tell you where it is and then you come and pick it up later? Is there something else that this is better modeled as? Because I think that really fundamentally the how we spell that particular solution is less important than do we all agree and does the shape of thing that we're trying to build actually meet our needs.
Thank you, Eric. That was a good point. I mean, it is essentially a Dropbox, right? A mailbox that I put something there, I give you a token, you approach that mailbox and retrieve that. And if you need to put something back for me, you put it there. I have the token, I grab it back. So the reason for going through this exercise of trying to see if WebDAV can be a viable solution is to basically point that out that off-the-shelf WebDAV just doesn't work. We will have to extend it, right? And the original proposal, as it's called, it's essentially a bunch of REST APIs which are on top of HTTP straight up. So do we want to go this route of WebDAV, which is an extension of HTTP, and extend that further, and then bring in all the baggage that WebDAV brings just to satisfy this WebDAV obsession, right? I mean, that's the question. Because the other option is straight up HTTP extensions. And
I
we do it. I mean, of course, that needs to be vetted out. It's not, I'm not trying to claim that that is the best solution out there, but it's a much easier path as I see it. So yeah.
I like where you're going with that, but just to very briefly respond, I do think it's worth not jumping all the way to, okay, it's X on top of HTTP or it's X with WebDAV and it doesn't work. Like, what is the delta for one? What is the delta? How much are we building here? How much are we building there? Like, how do you actually spell them? And when you actually look at it in real life, do we look at this and go, this is gross? Do we look at this and go, oh yeah, that's totally doable? And so I think it might be where I don't want to do yet another round of like, let's step back. But it's probably worth taking a deep breath and not trying to jump all the way to this is answer X and therefore blah.
I see please in the queue, but so you're ahead of me, so
Yeah.
please.
Talia.
Okay, I'm new here, so forgive me if I'm asking a couple questions. One is, what do you mean by credential? Do you mean a password? Question mark. And then this sounds a little bit like the encrypted data vault work that has happened at diff/credentials community group and looking at using object capabilities to support access to encrypted data vaults in the cloud that have stuff.
So thank you for that question, Kalia. Yes, as we saw in that IAB meeting where identity is defined like, what was that, 17 different ways? So is credential. If I talk to an academic, a credential is a degree that tells you that I have ability to do computer science or whatever it is, right? For a computer scientist, probably a credential is a username password thing. So yes, it is a loaded term. In this case, the way we are using it is that a credential is a set of cryptographic tools along with some metadata that lets you have access to some property. So that could be your car, that could be your house, a hotel room. So it does include some cryptographic key. So it could be a symmetric key, asymmetric key, whichever way they designed it. And some metadata, like how do you use that key? Do I just print a solution to a challenge on a paper and let them scan it? Or do I use some radio technology? Do I use NFC? Do I use UWB, Wi-Fi, something, right? There has to be some metadata about how to transmit or talk to the reader. And some other things like, oh, if I get a key to my hotel room, but it's not valid till 3 p.m. So there is that some other information involved as well. So it's essentially some cryptographic information with this metadata that encapsulates this conceptual object that lets you access something. That's what a credential is in this context. I hope that answers.
And just to add to that, we defined that term in the requirements doc along with the use cases.
Can you please come up to the mic? Please respect for the remote participants, please.
I just named another place where similar sounding work is happening, so hopefully you can go and look at that if it's useful.
That could be. Would you mind sending an email or something? At least, like, I didn't catch it, but
If you can put it in the chat, yeah, we'll take a note of it. Ecker?
Yeah, I guess I just I sort of want to resist the notion that this is obviously a set of extensions to anything. I mean, fundamentally, like the semantics of this doodad are, I write some file somewhere, I give you the address, you get to read it, and then you get to write some file somewhere, and I know how to read it, and I get told when it changed. That's the entire semantics of the system, right? And
that somewhere is not exactly accurate. Like, you write the file somewhere, how do I know where it is at?
yeah, so I transfer that information, but that's not, huh?
How?
In some you've already specified some out of band fashion via SMS or something like that, right?
So that's the point, right? I mean, these round trips are happening. So that out of band happens once.
I understand that.
I initiate it, and
Right.
then there is no out of band.
I understand that. Yes, but my point is that all that requires is that the address and all future addresses be deterministic. It does not require to be the same address. And so like the reason you have this problem this problem is on the slide is because you decided that the address ought to be the same. But that's like a misfeature. And so if you just agree the rest are different and deterministic, this entire problem on the slide goes away, as well as any of your other problems. And so like the more you think of this as an abstract file storage mechanism, and the less you think of it as a messaging system, the simpler the architecture will be.
Thank you very much, Eric. I can't agree more with the approach. The thing is that I am biased since I wrote the original proposal. So I went to WebDAV experts who are co-authors of the WebDAV extension for authentication. And I asked them, guys, how would you implement that? It was a private conversation. I don't know if I can refer to that right now. I can invite the author to the mailing group and ask him to express his opinion. And he says, you in the WebDAV, you need lock. That's what you need. But lock, unfortunately, is only a write lock. There is no read lock or delete lock. So I'm exchanging my key material with Yogesh. And then let's say Brad is coming and deleting the key material. So we cannot do complete the exchange.
I guess I just don't understand. I guess, sorry, how did you get, I don't understand. How did you get in the state where Brad deleted the key material?
So we, as you said, we refer to that key material, we store it as a file system, a file in a file system,
Yeah.
right? Or mailbox, whatever it is. And we expose a set of API endpoints, read, write, delete, etc. Basically, that's all we need. We need REST.
Agreed. Okay.
Yeah. So, and we are I sent my set of keys to Yogesh, and he's authorizing them by digital signature. Basically, that's a part of the exchange.
Yeah.
And since we don't do that online, we can be offline at the moment.
Yeah.
A third person comes and just hits a delete method on that file.
How was he allowed to do that? Why? I mean, that seems like a problem already.
Yeah, I understand. But it may happen.
But regardless of, but I mean, if Brad is able to delete the file, sure he's able to read it, which the whole thing is falling apart, right? I mean, I guess I just don't understand what this, I'm very confused. The underlying semantics of the system you think you're providing is, why is Brad able to touch the data at all?
Well, that's not the question. I think, I apologize. I think that's not the right question. The question is whether it's possible or not with WebDAV. So with WebDAV, it's possible because it's only write lock. I'm locking a resource
but the reason you can't touch it is access control, not locking.
Right. Again, in the requirements document, we defined that this is the exchange between two devices.
Yeah.
Right. And the final goal is to transfer credential from one device to another.
Yes.
I think it's true. It's what we defined in the document.
I agree. Yes.
Right. So, and during the time of the transfer, if somehow that resource or the file or credential is being deleted, we cannot achieve our goal of transferring. And it's been deleted not by the two participants who we defined in the requirements, but some third participant. It's technically possible with
I mean, don't do that. Don't build a system where Brad can do that. Access control the data. That's what I'm getting at. I don't understand. Locking is about protecting between two people who have cooperative access to the data. And Brad should have access to the data. If he does, then you have other problems.
I totally agree. In the perfect world, that would
no. In the secure world, the world you described is insecure.
It is insecure with WebDAV implementation. No, that's my point.
This is I'm sorry, but I think you radically misunderstand what I'm saying. So let me try it one more time. The problem, that the way you got in that hole was that Brad was allowed to touch that resource in the first place. And WebDAV absolutely supports HTTP, part of HTTP, it absolutely supports things that people can't access. So I mean, again, I'm not really here to advocate for WebDAV or not WebDAV, but any system where a third party is able to tamper with this data is going to be radically insecure, and that is not a property of WebDAV versus not WebDAV. It's a property of underlying system design. So do you want to
So if I'm understanding correctly, that's also part of the requirement stock, right? Is so if I'm person A and I'm sender A and I'm trying to send to receiver A, if I stick this key somewhere and then say, hey, go pick it up from there, if random attacker I guess we're still in A, can show up and like access that, like that's a problem. If I'm trying to send you my car key and somebody else can drive my car, like that's not cool.
Yeah.
And similarly, if somebody else can interfere with that, modulo being able to prevent us from communicating about where to go find it by deleting it partway through, that's a problem.
Absolutely.
And I think that's somewhat independent of WebDAV or locks or anything else.
That's right. The concern here is, at least when we looked into WebDAV as a possible solution, WebDAV is susceptible to those problems much more easily than the HTTP extensions that we have proposed, right? I mean, by default, I mean, if you look at WebDAV RFC, any resource that's on a WebDAV server is available to all participants on the internet. Those are exact words from the RFC, right? So you have to do something above and beyond what basic WebDAV
Yeah.
provides you. So that, as you mentioned earlier, there is a delta. So the point is that this WebDAV is this magic bullet that solves the problem is not accurate. There is a lot more to do there.
Right.
And if you are doing a lot more, why not just take a simple approach, right? I mean, that's the point, that why not just take HTTP and put something on top of that, which is much less delta than taking WebDAV and putting something on top of that. That's the essence of this argument today. That's like
it feels like we've jumped ahead again a little bit, and I think I've cheerfully missed some of the other conversations here, which may or may not be a win. But I think when we're talking about building something on top of JMap or building something on top of WebDAV or building something on top of HTTP, we don't need a standard if the answer is check these boxes on the thing that you downloaded off of the internet and started running on your server. We don't need to agree on how to interoperate on that. That's just a instruction manual for how to set up the existing thing. And that is often a wonderful place to be because that reduces overhead for deploying all kinds of products. But where I'm going with that is in my mind, WebDAV, the choice of what we build on top of is not about does the thing that we would build on top of satisfy all of our requirements out of the box. The question is, what do we start with, and then what do we need to add to it? And so it seems to me that one way that we often approach this is we say, okay, great, we don't need to necessarily sort out all of the details, but very similar to some of the nice table that you have here and things, there's, a bunch of the details that are obviously already satisfied, right? A bunch of problems that are obviously already solved. And then there's a bunch of them that are either a question mark or where we have some way to say, yes, and this is a problem that we know we will need to deal with. And sometimes you look at that and you say, yep, here's 50 problems that we know we need to deal with, and this one has 2. Maybe we should think about that. Sometimes there's a lot more murkiness, and it's worth actually doing the exercise to try to address a bunch of those problems for each of the solutions and say, okay, how big is that delta? What is going on? So I think access control versus locking versus all of that kind of thing is something that we can sit in a nice, cute little box and say, okay, cool, that is one thing. But I don't think that that's a place where we would generally, when talking about any kind of a protocol, we would be like, okay, well, that decides it. So it seems like that's a nice thing to note and probably fits about one slide's worth of note to take. And this is a good thing to have in one slide, which you've done exactly that. So like, great, let's put it in this box and keep going.
Right, I'm here not as a chair, right? But I wanted to comment on what you were saying. And let me see if I can reinterpret what you were saying, right? Both of the Erics, I think. So that what the Erics were talking about is essentially operational considerations, right? If you use something like a normal LDAP server or a normal WebDAV server, and you can set it up in such a way that it fulfills the requirements, and you can write down those things as an operational consideration for the protocol, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to change the WebDAV protocol in order to make it work, right? It's essentially a profile. In other standards bodies, people regularly talk about profiling standards when they do this, right? And I think that's what we're talking about. And it's not, I don't think it should be considered a problem for WebDAV if you have to profile it, right? If you have to set it up in a certain way to make it work.
So, thank you, Leif and Eric, for that. I mean, so just to clarify that we are new to this standard making process, so we are going to make some mistakes, and thank you for understanding that and helping us understand the process as well. So what we are trying to identify here is that we have those 10 requirements that we have adopted, and what are the requirements that are not that will need more work. So I think it would be a good idea to go to mailing list to figure out what can we do to achieve those goals, right? I mean, this is one of that requirements that needs more work. And so is the next one. If we could go to the next slide, the connection integrity requirement is also another requirement that is going to need more work if we are thinking of using WebDAV as a solution. In this, I don't know if people are clear about what connection integrity requirement is, but I can quickly summarize that. In that same example of Alice and Bob exchanging messages M1, M2, and M3, we want to make sure that it is actually Alice and Bob that are going through the entire sequence, and somebody Charlie is not injecting a message M2 or deleting a message M2 or something like that. There is that we want to make sure that the interaction happens between those two parties once it started. And that is something that I guess is another point that we need to discuss in depth, perhaps here or on email list, whichever sounds good. And as Eric mentioned, we would get the delta there. And then the next requirements, I'll let Dimitri talk about them.
Thank you very much, Yogesh. So again, trying to be unbiased, we spent a fair amount of time reviewing the WebDAV specification, and we just found areas we don't have an answer for, and we have our doubts how those areas can be covered by WebDAV. And here we are, basically, the non-correlation. So the original idea that the intermediate server, which serves to clients, doesn't collect the identities, doesn't store any PI data, etc. And just reading the WebDAV charter document, it's a distributed document authoring or resource authoring. And authoring means some identity, probably. Well, at least maybe the author name, right? So it's inherent into the charter doc. It's inherent to the protocol. That's, again, my personal opinion, which I got after reading the specification and the charter doc. So, and particularly WebDAV specification mentions the authorization between client and server, MTLS, and probably by digest. So some form of authentication. And again, I'm not claiming to be a security expert, but in my opinion, authentication means some form of identity shared between client and server. And I find problem here how having that identity server would not store and or use that. So basically that's my point here. And if someone can share the opinion on the matter, I would really appreciate that.
Eric, yeah, Aaron isn't. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. I'm new to this. I haven't been following what's been going on here, so I'm keep that in mind as I'm talking. But interesting problems, and I feel like there's a lot of parallels in this stuff to a lot of other work that's going on here. In particular, in the OAuth working group, which is the main group I'm a part of. And I'm hearing a lot of the requirements that you have are things that have also been discussed a lot in OAuth, OpenID Connect, verifiable credentials, spaces. And it feels like you don't have to reinvent everything from scratch. So I like that you're coming at it with the requirements. That's helpful. So I think that you can we can look at those and see if there's existing building blocks you can kind of pull from to solve that. And I wasn't quite following the whole like where WebDAV came from in this, but it sounds like you're pointing out a lot of problems with WebDAV, and I think that's probably accurate because it wasn't created with these constraints in mind. So it's just not fitting. But there's a lot of other things other places to draw from that I think can solve a lot of these already. So I just wanted to say that there's, well, actually, I don't know if you're here tomorrow. The OAuth working group is meeting in the morning, and most of the agenda is about verifiable credentials stuff, which has a lot of similar problems of exchanging data around moving between parties that sound like they have a very close relationship to what you're describing here. So if you're around, you should come attend and try to see if it makes any sense. Otherwise, I'll try to follow back up on this on the mailing list as well.
Appreciate it very much, and I'll try to attend.
Yeah, Aaron, sorry for putting you on the spot, but would you be willing to like review the requirement draft and threat model?
Sure. I was looking through the list of documents. I couldn't quite figure out which ones are the exact ones being discussed here. So maybe drop a link in the chat
Yes.
log and in the minutes so I can go back and find the links.
We will do that. Thank you.
Great.
Appreciate it. Yes.
So protocol machinery aside, how is it you think that the respective clients established to the server there are permitted to read and write? Let's start with the sender. What does the sender do to establish that the server is allowed to write?
Well, good question. So in my opinion, client just makes HTTPS request without client authentication, and that's it.
Okay, so anyone on the internet can do a write.
Yes.
Okay, great. And how does the and what how does he establish the ability to write to read from the mailbox?
Mm-hmm.
How does he establish that?
Well, using that DAF,
No,
I
no,
don't
abstractly.
Abstract. There is some locking mechanism shall be involved, right?
A login mechanism?
Locking.
No, I'm not talking. I'm just saying, like I write the file,
mm-hmm.
and sometime later the other side writes from back, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do to establish that I'm allowed to read that same file that was written by this other person? What is the credential mechanism that does that?
First come, first serve.
No. Surely it cannot be the case that. Surely that cannot be the case, right?
mm-hmm.
You're saying. So are you saying that in your design, like I want to send my
mm-hmm.
key material to Leif,
mm-hmm.
and I write this thing on the server and I send him a URL.
Mm-hmm.
Leif does some stuff and he eventually writes a file back, and then
Yep.
Brad can go and read the thing Leif sent?
Good question. So
Sure,
once the exchange happened between two people, the second person, the receiver, is supposed to delete the mailbox along with the content.
No. I'm sorry, I'm so confused. Like this is a two-way exchange in the simple version, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, second with simple version.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to send a message via this mailbox mechanism to Leif. Leif is going to send a message back to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what stops Brad from reading the message I sent to Leif, which is the URL is secret.
Mm-hmm.
What is it stops me from reading the message Leif sent back? Sorry, it stops Brad from reading the message Leif sent back to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so going back to my original proposal, which we presented a year ago, we proposed a locking mechanism, which sends a unique identifier, and that unique identifier is presented by two devices, and the server verifies there are two devices which are being.
So they share a secret key.
It's not a secret key. They don't share anything. Each one presents their own unique lock. It's a key, yes. It's some random number. And server collects 1 and 2 and says, that's enough. No more parties coming.
If I may add, they don't share the key. So you have your own key, Leaf will have his own key, and the server knows both of them. And server is going to only allow Leaf to read and write from that point on after the first come first serve, right? That's the idea. So you sent the first message, that invitation to Leaf.
Yes.
Leaf has now this token to go to the server to retrieve that. And
Yes.
as part of that retrieval process, Leaf is going to put a lock on that I'm the only receiver. And if later Yogesh or Brad try to come in to read this, don't allow that.
But
It's as simple
how
as
does
that.
how does he do that?
It's basically tofu, right?
That is the whole idea, right? You sent him an invitation with a token. He goes to the server with that token and also gives another token that, hey, I am this, by the way. Don't let somebody else read or write.
So it's just to confirm, it's a token used by client to connect to server, and server reads that token and says, okay, I have one party, and then another party is coming with a different token, and server collects a second token, says, we have
the initial sender generates a random token and gives it to the server?
Yeah, the original sender generates a token and puts it into a mailbox at the time of creation.
Okay, and then the server then enforces that mailbox can only be read by somebody with that token, or apparently the second token?
The server expects the second device to come and present a token, whichever token there is. As long as token exists, it locks these two together. We call it device claim in the original proposal.
Okay, so this is I mean, I'm not saying this won't work,
Ah.
but this is like radically more complicated than the most obvious simple thing, which is
Um,
simply to have the resources be named with random identifiers.
Eric, if you have better proposal, please.
Okay, I do, because it's actually quite well known.
I mean, I'm sure there are various ways to do the same thing, right? I mean, that's not uncommon. What we proposed there is, I mean, there is a draft link somewhere of the original art that the thing was proposed. It's called device claim. The idea is simple, that as a sender, I create this mailbox and I have a token that lets server know that if I'm talking to it, I will use that token. And the first person who's going to retrieve something from that mailbox, where they're using the mailbox ID to identify that resource, they will also put a token of their own on the server. So now that's creating essentially a connection. Imagine this as a pipe with two ends. One end is the sender, one end is the receiver. And they both have their own tokens, their own keys per se. They don't share the keys. I don't send that key to you, or you don't send your key to me.
I understand, but what I'm saying is you're fighting with the web model.
Sorry, what was that?
What I'm saying is you're fighting with the web model. The web model is like that things are resources and you put to them, and you're like fighting that. And the way to not fight it is to have is to use the way everybody else does this, which is capability URLs. And so like the reason like you have all this apparatus is because you're fighting with the web model. Because the web model thinks of things as resources. And if you just treat this as a read-write transaction on a secret identifier, like half of your problems will go away.
I mean, that's one opinion, and thank you for that. I'm
Yes,
sure
that
we'll
is, that's in
consider-
fact one opinion. Yes.
Yeah, it's yeah.
But as I'm saying, like all these questions you're asking are like all questions which, if you just do the thing I just said, would go away entirely.
We need to, I think, dig deep into it, right? It's if it was that easy to just write an RFC by 30 seconds of thought, that would be great. So that's why we are here. Right?
Well, I
So
have actually looked at the problem a little more in 30 seconds, but
So-
okay. But I guess
Eric, again, I do appreciate your expertise. We are way less knowledgeable than you, and if you can propose a better way to log this, but again, we just operating on the set of requirements and like considerations, and in our particular use case, the goal is to share key material. Let's say like key material between just two devices. If we were to share between multiple devices, or if we were to allow multiple users to edit the resource at the same time as WebDAV does, we probably would come up with a different mechanism. That's all.
Dumb clarification question. So to make sure I'm understanding the words that just scrolled before our eyes, I upload a thing to Mailbox that has some secret URL, and in doing so, I say, "Hey, this is me, my UUID, my key, my lock, whatever we want to call it." And so if I come back later, I can present that again and basically say, "Hey, I'm the person who created this. Like, please delete it, or let me look at it again, or whatever." And today, I then send Brad, "Hey, this is my secret URL," and he shows up. And the assumption is that I only tell people I want to access at that. And so when he shows up and says, "Hey, this is my key and who I am," we basically stick that in slot number 2. And he is now the only other person in the world who can ever read this. And we do that instead of my just sending him because one of the alternatives here is I would show up to the server and I would say, "Hey, put this secret letter in this envelope here," and somebody's going to show up with key XYZ, and then I would send Brad key XYZ, and he would show up to the server and say, "Hey, I got key XYZ from somebody. Can I read the thing?" I assume there's some benefit to having the secret URL in the middle and just trusting whoever shows up with the secret URL, something along the lines of like, we don't have to be as related, or the server can't track that we're the same something.
Yeah, I mean, that middle server is just a transport, right? It's as you mentioned, that you put a letter in that mailbox and then let somebody know how to go to that mailbox. And then when they reach the mailbox will have a second slot for that person. So they put a key in there so that if you need to exchange something back and forth, you use your own key to put something in, and Brad uses his own key to put something in, and you can read things back and forth.
And then we basically,
and then server doesn't know who you are, who Brad is, or what is being exchanged. That's the idea.
And this is all essentially an extra layer of assurance, because the fact that the mailbox address itself is secret in theory, we could do this without any extra key for anybody, because if Brad went and told somebody else the mailbox name, he could also have handed them his key. Or
Yeah.
same for me.
It is true, and we did consider just point-to-point encryption between two devices. We didn't need like any end boxes, like mailboxes there. We do that over iMessage internally.
Yep.
We could do that over Signal or WhatsApp, whatever. And then the problem here is that the WhatsApp, basically, it uses servers on the way. Signal requires servers with user authentication, strong authentication, and it collects identities, which contradicts our goal of not tracking identities. And that's the problem. We understand the solution is not perfect, but given the set of requirements, that's our proposal. If there is a better way to address that,
Well, I mean, that's why we're here, so that's good.
If I
Yeah.
may add just one more point. So just relying on that secret URL, right? The mailbox
Yeah.
identifier. That's essentially security through obscurity, right? If somebody cannot find what that secret URL is, you're fine.
It is, but at the same time, if I'm trusting Brad to not tell somebody that secret URL, I'm also trusting him to not hand them his key to that secret
Right.
URL.
But what if that server had something like a prop find kind of function where it could list all the URLs or all the resources that are out there, right? Or some logging or something where it leaks something. So
I'm a little dubious on that one, but yeah.
Eric, can you come up to the mic, please?
Okay, there's like really, again, I feel like you're really fighting the web because like you do know this is how Google Drive works, right? Google Drive has like this is called a capability URL. You have a nice long URL as a random, and it's like perfectly normal to be like you can only access it if you have a link. So like that is not insecure. That is a normal operational procedure, and the way you fix it, and the way you make it, and yes, you do not let people list all the URLs, but like just don't do that. Like, so it's just really weird that like you're like seem to be assuming that like things that people routinely do on the web like are not safe, but they are. And like it's true that URL can leak, but like lots of things can leak. As can your keying material. So I just don't understand like I guess like why do you think that's different? Why do you think that like that something which like I say is a very routine practice is somehow unsafe?
Eric, I do appreciate it, but I think we're getting back discussing the requirements. I think we kind of agreed upon the requirements.
No, and I'm saying what what Eric and I have independently described meets these requirements.
Hi, Aaron Burke again. I would just like to point out that capability URLs are not necessarily considered good security practice anymore. So almost no, never. The problem with capability URLs is that it's a shared secret on both ends essentially. And it's the same problem as any form of bearer token, where it is the same thing, same string used at the sender and the receiver. So are they useful? Yes. They have fundamental problems, and there's a lot of efforts in many different groups that are working to solve that exact problem and stop shared secrets from being used in many different places. So I would also just like to suggest that there is very possibly a solution that doesn't rely on the URL being the only thing that's protecting the entire credential exchange. So there's probably a better way.
Thank you, Aaron. Yes, I mean, we do agree with that notion, and hence we are trying to come up with a solution to that, and that is on the right track. So certainly thank you for that.
Okay, in the interest of time, Brad, I think, yeah, you're next. Just keep it succinct.
Okay, just very succinct. Just a bit of a point. We haven't agreed on the requirements. We've agreed to adopt a draft that will describe the requirements. So that's more of a starting point. It's not finished, not final, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. Totally fair. We just ask people if there are any questions to requirements, and
Still not the same thing. But that's okay. That's why we iterate. That's why we're here. That's why we're trying to talk about this stuff. Yeah, the shared URL thing, very briefly, it's a little weird because it feels strange to just be like, yo, here's the secret URL that you could guess. But arguably, that's the same number of bits as if I had a shorter URL and Brad's secret key that I could also just guess. So that's cool. It'd be nice to have it not just all be the same thing. But anyway, I do think it might be worth chatting a little bit more about what are the mechanisms that we want to use here. I think being able to model this in a very straightforward way of like, hey, like you were saying, I stick this envelope here and then I tell you where to go get the envelope and then like you come pick that up. I think there's a little bit of conversation around, great, if you then take out the thing I put in that envelope, put something else in it and put it back, how do you notify me about that? What is that secondary transport? Is that purely out of band? Do we talk about it at all? Are there requirements for what that needs to be? Those are all in here later, so that's all good stuff. But anyway, the point is, I think let's not rat hole too much on exactly that shape, and let's talk more abstractly about what is the human meaningful building block that we're building, and less what is the exact spelling of the protocol bits that get us there. Like conceptually, I want to have a mailbox. Great. So let's go from there.
So to like put it in human terms, right? That this is the idea that we are trying to share a credential, which is an abstraction of a physical object, right? We are trying to model a physical object into this digital object where there is some cryptographic material, something else, and it's not just easy to share that blob. I can't just give you a blob of data and that works as a key. There is more steps involved, and depending on what vertical we talk about, right, whether it's car key or home key, hotel key, whatever other things in future that I probably can't envision right now, uh, the mechanisms, the protocols that are needed to get this credential will change or will evolve. What we are trying to build here is a mechanism where I can send a key to you, a credential to you, by just one out of band message that, hey, here is a thing to initiate this thing, and then let's go back and forth, and then you have the key. That's the human element. This is what we are trying to build here. That's the transport. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, you can
Next
go
slide,
ahead,
please.
Dimitri. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's wrap it up. Yeah.
You want the next one?
Please. Yeah, basically the last point is not requirements, it's just considerations that we have. One of them, we wanted to support multiple forms of notifications, including push notifications, because we are expecting this solution to work with mobile devices, and power is of essence. We try to save power as much as possible. And again, just looking at WebDAV, it doesn't support that particular type, like out of the box. That's why I had a conversation with the author of the WebDAV and implementer, and he suggested JMap, which basically addressed that. And the trust relation between client and server. So as I said, we don't expect clients to do strong authentication with the server, but we still want some kind of attestation over the material which they store at the server. And the proposal in the requirement doc is some form of web authn, probably. That's what we expect to use. And I don't really know how WebDAV supports that.
Okay, we have John in the queue. John, if you can just keep it synced, we are running out of time.
That seems unlikely, but I'll do my best. John Bradley. So I'm curious what you mean by support for WebAuthn, and I mean, I sort of kind of get what you're trying to achieve by establishing a key when there's only a one-way communication in the front channel, perhaps. But WebAuthn actually has a solution for that, which is deployed in browsers now, called Hybrid, which through a QR code, you send a bit of key material, there's a back-end exchange, and Bob's your uncle, both ends can talk to each other and pass a WebAuthn credential or any other credential. So how do you want to use WebAuthn, or you're trying to make some level of turtles where you have this protocol to do that, but authenticate with WebAuthn?
No. It's basically just that. Use WebAuthn as some kind of attestation. So we store the content in the mailbox, and device produces attestation along with that content. So the server can just verify it, that it's
Right.
coming from a valid device. That's it.
But if you have WebAuth, then you already have a solution for this entire problem.
Okay, I haven't thought of that deeply, but if you can
But
share your
That's
ideas.
what the hybrid protocol in, well, it's actually in the CTAP draft, which is part of WebAuthn. But how to do exactly this is part of WebAuthn/FIDO
Okay.
that Google has implemented.
Yeah, John, bring that on the mailing list. Yes, please.
Just a clarification, what are you attesting to with this?
So that the content that we store in the mailbox, it's coming from the good device, valid, not jailbroken, etc.
Yeah, Brad, let's talk later. Bring it to me. Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion? So for a change, we have energy in the working group. That's excellent, right? And what is a good next step in a situation like this? We have an agreed, more or less agreed set of requirements. We have multiple possible ways to fulfill those, right? Can we get a few straw man proposals in the form of ideas, right? Simple write-ups, forget about the boilerplate. Let's just keep it extremely simple, right? Even quick email notes saying, here's how I would do it using technology X, Y, and Z. But something we can actually start to critique and judge and evaluate. Clearly there are, we might discover that we don't exactly agree on the requirements in the process. Maybe, yeah. But I think we're closer on the requirements than we might think. And there are multiple ways to do this, to skin this cat. I'm absolutely convinced, right? But let's see if we can tease out some of the details on those cat skins, as it were, right? I'm stretching it. And with that, thank you. There are regular, I think we're going to have to schedule an interim, at least one interim before Prague. Before Prague. But in the meanwhile, people have displayed like an enormous amount of interest here today. It would be great if that could translate into the mailing list with a set of concrete proposals for, here's some other ways you can do this. So we can get this show on the road.
Yeah, I just want to call out again, like we got several volunteers today to review the requirements draft, threat model, and some people have really good suggestions on the possible solutions. Please, please, please go to the mailing list, put your reviews, feedback, suggestions, everything in there, and let's get the ball rolling. And we'll send you invite for the interim meeting. We do bi-weekly meetings. If anybody's interested in getting more active, I'm sure authors are more than happy to invite you to that. Please reach out.
We also have a Slack for authors. So if folks want to join that, just ask for an invite.
Okay, perfect. I think Yogesh has
Just
something to say.
one last comment. I mean, I understand that maybe requirements are not clear or some language may not be clear. There is confusion. So feel free to ask questions because it helps us clarify things as well. As Eric asked, what is the human connection here? It kind of helps to describe it that way.
Yes, yeah. We're done. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Roman, I think for you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I apologize. I did not attend the Tigress because I'm in trouble for a while. So yeah, so good. So, sorry, I will facilitate things like that. Just kind of